welcome. It's August the 7th, 2022. I'm with Ajahn Punnadhammo in Northern Ontario and Pannobhasa in South Carolina. And we're going to compare Buddhism versus Hinduism. Pannobhasa can start. He had a question about this.
Yeah. Under the in the comments under the video of our previous discussion of like comparing, contrasting Buddhism and Christianity, somebody requested that we do a similar one on Buddhism and Hinduism. You know, how they're similar and how they're different. And it seemed like a good idea, especially because Buddhism and Hinduism are rather similar. I mean, they've obviously borrowed terminology and concepts from each other. I mean, you can say that in the Buddhist time, Hinduism really didn't exist yet. It was more like Vedic Brahmanism. And the mainstream of Vedic Brahmanism was in some ways more similar to ancient Greek and Roman religion, where you got the priestly, the priests doing fire sacrifices to the gods for worldly favors, like sons and cattle and victory in battle and so forth. And maybe it was sort of a similar, I mean, this is debatable, but it may have been a similar undercurrent going back to the Indus Valley civilization of a more atheistic, kind of pessimistic, karma-based religion, where the world is a bad place or a place of suffering, and you're supposed to purify your mind and your karma in order to escape from it. And both Buddhism and Hinduism have got some of that in common. They both believe in karma and so forth. Like in Buddhism, in the Vinaya texts, if you are a convert to Buddhism, you have to go through a kind of probationary period before you're allowed to be ordained. But the Buddha allowed Hindus or proto-Hindus at the time, then they didn't require the probation period because they already believed in karma and so forth. So they were already similar enough that you didn't have to go through probation before you could be ordained. So I would say that the main differences, I think, mainly is just a belief in God or gods. I mean, gods, plural, small g gods. Buddhism has that also, although you're not really making sacrifices to them or praying to them. They're not going to send you to heaven or hell, anything like that. And they don't live forever and so forth. Whereas in Hinduism, I think they might have the similar idea of gods not living forever. I mean, they might live a zillion, gajillion years, but still there are temples to these gods, and you can pray to them, make sacrifices to them, and they'll give you rewards and so forth. And I mean, there's some of that in Buddhism, but not nearly as much as in Hinduism. So I would say that's like one of the main differences. And also there's just the idea that Buddhism is non-Vedic. So, I mean, it does not accept the 4 Vedas or the 3 Vedas as authoritative. Those would be 2 of the main differences.
Yeah. Okay, Ajahn Punnadhammo.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you said there. That's what the good overview. Couple of points that I'd like to maybe expand on a bit. When you said that the religion at the Buddhist time was not what we call Hinduism now, I think that's quite true. And the obvious difference is that the Vedic religion, the Brahmin time, would perform animal sacrifices, and the Hindus now have a very put a very big emphasis on ahimsa, or not harming, not killing. And Buddhism had a different. I'd also like to bring up a separate point that some presentations, kind of superficial presentations of Buddhism, see it as a reform movement from Hinduism, and I don't think that's true at all. That they have different historical roots, and you touched on that. That the Vedic religion came in with the Aryans from Central Asia, and they came and brought it into India. The Vedas they already had the Vedas, or at least the first 3, before they entered India. Whereas the Samana tradition, of which Buddhism borrowed quite a lot and is in that kind of lineage. That was pre-Aryan, probably a Dravidian tradition of the word samana has the same cognate root as the English word shaman. So it was a shamanistic kind of practice, which is a very old human spiritual practice. You know, this shamanism of going into altered states of consciousness and receiving messages. So this was a long-standing tradition in India, pre-Aryan, and the Buddha tapped into that. And then in later times, Hinduism and which we can use the word loosely, Hinduism and Buddhism were in a constant dance. They were interrelated closely, like, you know, back and forth with ideas and so on. I've seen, for example, some scholars think that the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the major texts of later Hinduism, was specifically written as a refutation to Buddhist not self view.
Yeah, I've seen that too.
Yeah, and of course, in later Buddhism in India became corrupt and adopted a lot of Hindu ideas and concepts and so on, and you know, Tantricism is an example of that. And you know what Hinduism, mature Hinduism as it exists now, has been heavily influenced by Buddhism. So it's not at all that the Brahmin religion that we find portrayed in the suttas is something entirely different.
Well, you mentioned the Dravidians. Who are the Dravidians, or what does that mean?
Indigenous people of India.
Oh, okay.
And like currently, they would be like the Tamils and so on in the south of India.
Yeah, and I've read that it was largely like Southern Indian influences that really brought about much of the change from the Brahmanistic version of proto-Hinduism to the more devotionalistic and emotional kind of religion of modern Hinduism.
Yeah, the Tamils particularly, you know, their culture produced a lot of devotional songs and poetry and so on.
Yeah.
I want to mention when Prince Siddhartha was in training, he met a master Lara Kalama, taught him like the 4 jhanas, the master Daka Ramaputta, he learned all 8 jhanas. So this was known prior to the Buddha. So then, you know, quite a high level of sophistication to get into all these jhanas. So the Buddha was standing on the shoulders of the greats who came before him. I guess would you call that the Vedic, or not the Vedic tradition, or the Dravidian?
That's the Samana tradition.
Yeah, Samana tradition, meditation tradition, like the forest tradition.
Yeah, you could see, you know, jhana-based practice as being kind of you could argue there's a kind of shamanism. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, possibly in really early times, like drug-induced, just taking like soma or whatever, although that was a Vedic drug. But still, even the Vedic priests would get high on some kind of entheogenic substance in order to have their trance states. And then apparently that got replaced by more and more sophisticated meditative techniques.
Yeah. But to make it the 4th jhana, think of all that equanimity, that deep concentration. That's very impressive. And that was taught to Prince Siddhartha.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Buddhism is more along the same tradition as Jainism and also the extinct Ajivaka religions, that apparently had similar ideas of, you know, no creator God, and you know, it's like it's karma oriented and so forth. And I think the Upanishads, which started off as secret forest teachings, were sort of picking up on that also. Although I've heard another theory that like the Hindu belief in karma could have been it could have just arisen within the tradition itself, because after the Vedas, the next stage of the Vedic literature is the Brahmanas as a kind of literature, and it became so sacrifice oriented that if you did the sacrifice correctly, it would pretty much compel the gods to do what you wanted them to do. And you had to like you had to recite the chants perfectly. If you stuttered or said any slurred your words, you'd have to start over again. And so one theory I've read is that the idea of karma came from the ritual act, and act is karma in Sanskrit. The word for act is karma. So it could have arisen that way, but it seems more likely to me that there was just a prehistoric spiritual tradition from before the Indo-Aryans, that there was a belief in karma, and it's like the world is a place of suffering, that you're supposed to liberate yourself through purification and so forth. And the Hindus picked up on that around the time of the Buddha. Even like the earliest Upanishads, I think, were composed before the Buddha's time.
Yeah.
But there has been a lot of back and forth. We were talking earlier about just public debates strengthening systems, and the Buddhists and the Hindus were debating a lot. I mean, for a while, Buddhism was the predominant religious system in India, and there was a lot of borrowing back and forth. Like I've read that Shankara, or Vedanta in general, borrowed a lot of Mahayana Buddhist concepts. Also, just the non-killing, the non-harming. I think that was largely the Buddha's influence that caused the Hindus to stop doing animal sacrifice and start with sacrificing just ghee and incense and non-harming, non-killing.
There is a contemporary belief in at least in some branches of Hinduism, that the Buddha was a incarnation of Vishnu.
Yeah.
And the reason he came to Earth, the primary reason he came to Earth, was to stop cattle slaughter.
Oh, well, he's also, I've read that he was also considered like the deceiver or the trickster, who was sort of purifying Hinduism by luring away the weak-minded, or something.
Leading them astray. That's what I said about the ninth incarnation of Vishnu. Yeah.
Yeah. So from the Hindu point of view, Buddhism would just be a branch of Hinduism, just going with that idea.
Yeah, that's how Hindus look at it. I've talked to Hindus, that's what they say.
Yeah, like in Nepal, there was this controversy going on where they weren't teaching Buddhism in the schools, and then the government's official response was, well, Buddhism is a branch of Hinduism, and we are teaching Hinduism in the schools, so no problem.
Oh, yeah.
I had a conversation once with a Hindu gentleman on a train ride. I was on a train in Thailand, and there was a Hindu fellow got me into conversation, and he said, all the other religions, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, they all date to a historical moment, a founder, but Hinduism dates from time immemorial.
Yeah, the immortal, the Vedas that have always existed, and the seven sages just sort of channeled them.
Yeah. The Vedas predate the universe.
Yeah.
Yeah, the universe was formed as a vehicle for the Vedas to be played out in.
What about Krishna? Is he supposed to be the furthest back in their system? As an historical figure?
There's ones before him.
Yeah, the first avatar of Vishnu, I think, was like a giant fish or something.
Yeah, something like that. There was some animal forms, and Krishna was the one before the Buddha.
Yeah, and then Rama before him.
Yeah.
Did the Buddha ever comment on Krishna?
No, not directly, but there is there are a couple of references to in the Pali word is kanha, which some the dark one, which some scholars think is a reference to Krishna.
Yeah.
There's one Jataka story that the 10 slave brothers, that follows the plot of the Ramayana. It's kind of jumbled up from, it's not exactly the same, but it's obviously derived from the same source material as the Ramayana.
There is also a parita that the Burmese monks chant. I'm not sure about in Thailand, what the Jaga Sutta, where one of the hosts, among the host of Saka, King of Gods, is a god named Isana, who scholars say was like a proto-Vishnu. But he was just of the Tawatimsa gods at that time. I think Shiva also started off not being as advanced. He wasn't the god of everything for the Shaivites in the early days. He was like
Yeah.
a storm god or something.
Shiva was pretty late in the form that we know him. It was they identify him with the Vedic god Rudra, who also occurs in the Pali lists of gods.
Yeah.
That's another kind of point that's interesting, is the way the Buddhist cosmology, the Theravada cosmology, kind of domesticated the Hindu, or proto-Hindu gods. The chief god of Tawa Thinks of Heaven, Saka, is identified explicitly. There's no debate about it because it's right in the text. This Saka and Inda, or Inda is an alternate name for
Indra. You mean Indra, right?
The Sanskrit is Indra, in Pali,
Yeah.
Inda, and so he becomes, and in the Vedic times he was the supreme god, and then the later developments, Brahma became the supreme god, and the Brahmas in the Buddhist cosmology are related also explicitly to, like, there's a sutta where Sariputta's teaching a dying layperson how to do metta meditation, because he says that this person is a Brahman and he seeks company of Brahma. So I taught him the way to the realm of Brahma, and the Buddha chastised him, says, you didn't go far enough.
Yeah, I think there's some religious propaganda involved in some of this, where like two of the highest gods in Hinduism got converted over to Buddhism pretty much. There are suttas where Brahma and Saka are guarding the doorposts on either side of the Buddha's dwelling.
Yeah.
The Buddha, and according to the early legend, the Buddha was, he was going to be a Pacheka Buddha. He was just going to be like a hermit Buddha and not teach Dhamma. And then Brahma came down and begged him, get down on his knees, and was begging him to start Buddhism going, which would then, sort of downplay the importance of Brahma himself. And then Brahma is kind of portrayed as kind of a blowhard in some of the suttas.
Yes. Yeah. And the idea that he's a supreme creator god is an idea that at least actually had in themselves. They perceive themselves as being supreme creator gods.
Yeah. And then also the Buddhists took the personification of ultimate reality and put him in a kind of a mediocre heaven realm with lots of other heaven realms above it. Some of them accessible only to advanced Buddhists.
Yes.
So there is some propaganda going back and forth. And I think the early Buddhists kind of got their karmapants with the Mahayana Buddhists sort of dissing the Hinayanists.
Yeah. Sariputta, who's the wisest person after the Buddha in the Theravada canon, is second only to the Buddha. He becomes almost a figure of fun in some of
in Mahayana.
Yeah, especially what was it, the Vimalakirti Nirdesa Sutra, which is a relatively famous one, and you've got this advanced bodhisattva Vimalakirti who's going to brothels and taverns and so forth, and he's got this chair that Venerable Sariputta tries to sit on, but it becomes so large that his feet won't touch the ground. He's like a little kid on a high chair. There's lots of propaganda going all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
But the Buddha was relatively respectful to the Brahmins. I mean, he would argue that a true Brahmin is really a holy man based on his own merits and not just the son of a Brahmin. But still, I mean, he didn't bash the early Vedic Brahmins nearly as much as he bashed, the six heretical philosophers, the Jains and Ajivakas and so on.
Yeah, that's
the cosmology that seems important to me, like Theravada cosmology with the fine material sphere and the formless realms. I take that really literally, like I hope they didn't just create that as a competition with the Hindus.
No, I don't think so. I don't think that's the entirety of it, but I think there's, there may have been some intention that way in the choice of terminology, like this is what the Brahmas actually are. They're not the supreme God of creator of the universe, but they're an elevated being, and
Another thing I want to ask about or discuss is the chakras. Like as far as I know, the Buddha never mentioned the chakras, that this was a later idea developed in Hinduism after the Buddha, right? Because it's not in the Pali Suttas anywhere.
Not at all, no. And it's not found really in Theravada whatsoever, with the exception of a few iconoclastic kind of teachers like Ajahn Lee, who his meditation system is kind of chakra based, although it's really use that language explicitly.
But does anyone know like what century the chakras originated in?
I don't know. Pannobhasa, do you have an idea of that?
No, I really haven't followed that. It might come from yoga, which was another one of those systems originally that was based more on the prehistoric, like Indus Valley civilization. Well, Sankhya, I guess it was called. And then some of the followers of Sankhya got incorporated into Hinduism by acknowledging the authority of the Vedas. And so they became a sort of theistic Sankhya, which is essentially what is yoga now. Whereas the other Sankhyas, like the orthodox non-Vedic Sankhyas, were similar in many ways to Buddhism and Jainism and the Ajivaka systems.
I'm just assuming that the chakras must be an idea after the Buddha. Otherwise, he would have commented on and say, well, no, we don't do the chakras around here. He would have said something about it, right? Because it seems to be such a big idea in Hinduism.
Yeah, another basic teaching of Sankhya that got incorporated into Hinduism is the three gunas. You know, you've got the sattvic guna, which is usually associated with color white, and like certain kinds of foods are sattvic foods. And then you've got rajasic, which is associated with red, and that's more like passionate and so forth. Then you've got tamasic, which is dark, and that's sort of like stale and like slightly tainted food and so forth, conducive to like ignorance and so forth. So that I don't know. I mean, maybe the Ajahn would know if the three gunas even is mentioned anywhere in the suttas. I don't remember.
No, I'm pretty sure not. No,
Yeah.
No, that not at all. That there's the four elements, which is pretty universal. I've never seen anything related to the gunas.
Yeah, but that was a big deal in the Bhagavad Gita. There's a lot of talk about the three gunas in there. But yeah, I also read that one of the purposes of the Bhagavad Gita was a kind of polemic against Buddhism, because Buddhism and Hinduism were, rival systems at the time. And just the very idea that, it's like, the Buddhists were just completely uncompromising with regard to nonviolence, which is one reason I assume why they were pretty much wiped out in India when the Turkish Muslims invaded. Whereas the Hindus still had their, they had a certain heroic tradition, of, Rama, the Mahabharata and so forth. So, and then the Bhagavad Gita just says, it's more spiritual to do your duty, even if you're a soldier, than to just renounce and not fight. I mean, Arjuna in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, he's refusing to kill his own kinsman, and Vishnu persuades him to just go ahead and do it because it was his dharma or his duty.
Yeah, that's the line we remember a lot from the Bhagavad Gita. Yeah, so it's like a dig on Buddhism
to some degree. Yeah.
Although what about I want to mention, like with Tibetan Buddhism, it's such a combination, it seems, of Hinduism, like the Vajrayana and the tantric practices.
Yeah,
do you think of that just like kind of a combination of Hinduism and Mahayana Buddhism?
But the Buddhism that came out of India in Tibet was already like very late Buddhism, and had been a long time wandering in strange thought forms,
Yeah,
picking up a lot of things from Hinduism and inventing a lot of other stuff. So, and then once it got into Tibet, it also mixed with the indigenous bone religion, which is another advanced shamanistic practice. So that Tibetan Buddhism is quite a mix of a lot of different sources.
And how many times do you hear today, right? People refer to Tibetan Buddhism or Tibetan monks as the ultimate spiritual practice. Like people are non-Buddhists, they just assume, well, Tibet's the best thing, it's the greatest thing. They always no one refers to Thailand or Burma, right? They always talk about Tibet.
Well, it is the Vajrayana. It's the third turning of the wheel, you know, in their own view, right?
And that
Yeah,
reminds me,
so-
I'm republishing my book, my publisher in India, and I had a section in it called Mara Made Mahayana, and I have a bit of a sarcastic thing about the Buddhists aren't getting really tired turning the wheel the second time for the Mahayana, the third time for the Vajrayana. Yeah, they really stretch that, but that's a whole other topic, I guess, than Hinduism.
Yeah, I think a lot of that tantric stuff, I mean, it does have Hindu influence, but also at that point, like early medieval times, it was like the centers of Buddhism in India were universities. And we know from what's going on nowadays that academic types can really take the ball and run with it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one reason why Buddhism collapsed in India, is because the Muslim Turks would just wipe out the universities. They just slaughter everybody.
There's a text that it's like a record from the Muslim side of their invasion of India, and I saw it, you know, an excerpt from that in a book, A History About India, that when the Turks came across Nalanda University, their spies looked over the wall and they saw all these men walking around with shaved heads and dressed identically, and they thought it was a military base.
Oh
Yeah.
no.
It did have big defensive walls, and I think the
Yeah.
king did put like a little garrison of soldiers there to help protect it, but that just made things worse.
They assumed it was a military base, and they decided to attack it, and they sacked the whole place and destroyed it.
That's a tragedy. You mean if they knew it was a big Buddhist university, they might have not destroyed it so much?
Who knows? I don't know. I think they probably would have. I don't know if they would have been as brutal, but they
Yeah.
probably would have destroyed it, maybe without killing everybody, because
Yeah.
they're heretics
Yeah.
going against Allah, you know.
Yeah, they were destroying the pagodas and temples also. So yeah, probably
Yeah, what a
wouldn't control very
discretion.
much.
Yeah.
Then
It
there's
is kind of oh, go ahead, please.
yeah, I was going to bring up that between Hinduism and Buddhism. Then in modern times, there's the Ambedkar movement.
Yeah,
revival.
Dr. Ambedkar, yeah, Theravada in India.
Well, he's strange kind of mix. He's not really properly Theravada either, because one of their doctrines is that they don't accept rebirth.
Oh,
Because they see that as an anchor of the caste system.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's really disappointing. I thought he was this great
Yeah.
Theravadan hero in India, brought so many people, the untouchables, to Theravada. They don't accept rebirth. It's not Buddhism.
Yeah, no, I know, but that, it seems like his motivation was not really so spiritual or religious, but it was more political. He was quite justifiably protesting against the caste system, and he thought the best way for the Dalits, the untouchables, to escape from the oppression of the caste system was to throw off Hinduism.
You think if they became Buddhist, what's wrong with rebirth? An untouchable can take a good rebirth depending on his conduct.
His way of thinking, I believe, was that the reincarnation or rebirth was kind of the intellectual justification for the caste system. Like, you're born as an untouchable because you were a bad person, so now we can treat you like crap. And wanted to just wipe that out, get rid of that.
Doesn't make sense, all right? Doesn't make sense, really.
No. But that's another, like another turning of the wheel, another cycle in history that Hinduism throwing up this kind of unorthodox branch of Buddhism. And
You're right. Yeah.
Well, to some degree, there was something like that exists in Sri Lanka to this day, where you still have a caste system in Sri Lanka. I've heard that some sects of Theravada will accept only members of one caste.
That's correct. Yeah. There's one, they have different, I can't remember if it's 3 or 4. They have different Nikayas, just like in Thailand. And I think Burma also has more than one Nikaya, right?
Yeah, like 9 or 10, something like that.
Oh, that many. In Sri Lanka, they have, several different Nikayas, which are like bodies of monks that don't sit patimokkha together. They don't recognize each other fully, so they're completely separate lineages. And one of them follows the caste system, the lonely ordained upper caste people.
Yeah. So there is a lot of just mixing of Buddhism and Hinduism from the very beginning. Like the Buddha was using a lot of Sanskrit terms, maybe repurposing them, giving them slightly different meanings.
Yeah.
But just the jargon of philosophical Buddhism is mostly derived from the Vedic tradition.
And a lot of the kind of rituals and ceremonies in Theravada Buddhist countries are derived from Brahmanism, like the string ceremony. Like when we
yeah, I remember that. I did that as a monk.
Yeah, when we do a blessing, we pass a string around, a white string, and you have it in your hands, and the one end is wrapped around the Buddha Rupa, and the other end goes around the people, and then you chant paritas, and it blesses them. And that comes directly from Brahmanistic practice.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I think the water pouring ceremony was also pre-Buddhist, where if somebody does an act of merit, like donate a monastery or something, they'll pour water onto the ground for the earth to bear witness to their meritorious act or something like that. It's really a big deal in Burma.
Oh.
And also, I'd like to add that in Indonesia, before it was converted to Islam, it was a combination of Buddhism and Hinduism in Indonesia, and at one point they became so similar that it was like the king or the high, the Purohita or somebody of the king in Indonesia, they made the decision to just combine them into one system. So like in the island of Bali today, they'll say that they're Hindu, but if you look at their religion, there's a lot of Buddhist elements added into their Hinduism, so that it's, in some respects, it's even more Buddhist than Hindu, which is one reason why Buddhism is really growing fast in Bali right now.
Oh, wow.
So they are very similar. There's a lot of overlap, although there are some pretty basic differences, like belief in a supreme God and belief in a soul. Although if you get into advanced Vedanta, they don't really differentiate between the supreme God and the soul, because everybody shares the same soul ultimately. Although in Hinduism also they talk about a subtle body, and I've received a number of questions about the existence of a subtle body in Buddhism, and I can't really answer it. Like, is that what you're walking around in dreams and so forth? I think that's the way the Hindus interpret it. You've got a subtle body that passes from one life to the next, and that's the one that's acting in dreams and so forth.
There is a mention of one of the psychic powers is the mind-made body that emerges from the physical body and can then travel about. So this is an astral projection.
Although I think the Hindus believe that just everybody has one. It's just sort of a more subtle one than the physical one, but in a way based on the physical one, or a different version of the physical one or some such.
Right. Yeah, I get the impression, I don't think it's really clear in the Buddhist text, but I think the impression is it's not an innate thing. It's something that's produced as a psychic power, like a projection from your mind.
Yeah.
I'm just comparing to the Abrahamic religions. I'm still very impressed with Hinduism or Buddhism. I much prefer them over the Abrahamic religions in terms of sophistication, real spiritual path, and something that can generally uplift your life.
I think one reason for that was just the non-violence of Buddhism and Hinduism, so that slaughtering heretics just wasn't really an option. You had to win them over through reasoned debate rather than just banning them. I mean, sometimes you'd have like a Hindu king in Sri Lanka or India who would persecute other religions or some such, but as a general rule, they got along, if not in a friendly manner, at least a non-violent one, which definitely was not the case in the West.
No. No, I think that's a kind of a problematic feature of monotheism. Is if you believe there's one creator God, then anyone who doesn't accept that, they're obviously evil,
Yeah.
going against God. You know,
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Christians were persecuting each other even more than they were persecuting the pagans.
oh
After
yeah,
a while. It's just minor differences, you know, like should the Passover bread or the communion bread be leavened or unleavened, this kind of thing, or the Holy Spirit, does it pass, you know, indirectly through the Son or just directly from the Father, this kind of thing. I mean, people would just, I mean, it was just rioting and murder and that sort of thing going on.
We should refer the audience to our video, Buddhism versus Christianity, we did about a month ago. You can refer the audience and scroll back and see that. Yeah, we covered that well, yeah.
Yeah, maybe you can put a link underneath this one or something.
Yeah, we could put a link under this one. That would suit well as a link on both of them. I could put a link on that one to this one as well. Good idea.
Yeah, but I would say that it is a myth that the Buddha was like a Hindu reformer or anything.
Definitely not. I think that was a kind of an image that some of the early English translators and things liked, because they wanted to portray the Buddha as a Protestant.
Yeah,
breaking out from the Catholics. I get it. They're projecting on the Buddha.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, Richard Gombrich wrote a book where he was saying that one reason why the Buddha wasn't a Hindu, didn't just become a Hindu reformer, was he was on the outskirts of Vedic culture. You know, he was on the frontier practically in the foothills of Nepal. Yeah. And so he could see the Vedic system as an outsider and just choose. I mean, he just decided to take his own way rather than just try to fix what he wasn't really a member of to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. Makes sense.
But still, I mean, it was a predominantly Vedic culture that he was participating in at the time. I mean, there were way more Vedic Brahmanists than Buddhists in the Buddhist time, obviously. So, yeah, I mean, it was a lot of influence. I mean, it's really interesting how, I mean, in a way, it's sort of like, you know, Christianity has adopted so much like Jewish system, but I mean, in Christianity, it really was a reform movement of Judaism, or as far as I can tell, whereas the Buddha was just sort of an outsider on the outskirts of the Vedic system, and he just used a lot of their terminology and some of their philosophical concepts, maybe with modifications, and used that to explain his system. He probably adopted a lot of Hindu cosmology and so forth, also just the established beliefs of the people with regard to just the nature of the world, and just added, I mean, he had some really good innovations that I think are not really found in Hinduism, like anatta, obviously, also paticca samuppada, or dependent co-arising, I think is uniquely Buddhist and not really any kind of modification of Hinduism.
What about the Samanera influence? Like you're saying, he wasn't fully with the Vedas, so he went into the forest. Was he more influenced by the Samaneras in the forest? Like these two
think
forces?
that was part, like his roots were complex. You know, I think that Samana tradition was part of it, but he also was in that he was an Aryan, you know, a Kshatriya, and I get the impression that the Sakyan Republic that he grew up in was old-fashioned at the time. It was like an archaic remnant of the original Aryan tradition. You see the Buddha always, when he talks about the caste system, he always puts the Kshatriyas first and then the Brahmins.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the idea that a Buddha will always be of the highest caste.
Right.
So when the Brahmins are the highest, then you'd be a Brahmin.
So there's these two high castes, and it probably was in the earlier system, the priests were basically servants of the kings, you know, that they were like the intellectual class, but they were subservient to the kings. And later later that they began to become the supreme caste. They claimed themselves to be superior, and that even at the Buddhist time, they would dispute that that was a point of contention, that the Brahmins felt themselves to be superior, and they seemed to have been recognized as such in the monarchies in the Ganges Valley, like Kosala and Magadha, which were modern in the time. Like that was the leading edge of Indian civilization, and the Buddha came from this, this hillbilly backwater up in the hills that was still, hundreds of years behind the times. And so he had that, that root from the original Vedic civilization, the really older Vedic civilization, and he could see he traveled a lot in the Ganges Valley, so he was familiar with the more modern Brahminic kind of developments, and he also was in touch with the shamanistic tradition, which we see in the stories about his 6 years of wandering. That was very much in the like you mentioned, Brian, about his
And Master Alara Kalama, Master Udaka Ramaputta. So what were their influences then?
they were definitely in that shamanistic tradition. So he was, learning from them, and all these aesthetic practices he was doing with starving himself and so on. That's all the shamanistic stuff.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, there does seem to be some correlation between, or at least a little bit of correlation between the samanas, just the wandering renunciant philosophers, and the Kshatriya caste. Like Mahavira, who was supposedly the founder of Jainism, was also a Kshatriya. Some of the Upanishads have the sage who is giving the teachings also being Kshatriya. So there may be some influence of this Kshatriyas preferring some non-Brahmin system, just as a way of asserting their own preeminence or something like that.
That's interesting. I didn't know that Mahavira was a Kshatriya as well.
Well, according to legend, he was, but they seem to have borrowed an awful lot from the Buddha's life story. So it's hard to say. But he is considered to have been a Kshatriya.
Yeah, it's been about 2 hours together with all three videos. Shall we wrap it up?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, well, thank you kindly, Ajahn Punnadhammo Pannobhasa.
Okay,
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, I think that was some good material we produced today.